This is the Weigh In podcast by Benoit Chestnut. And on this week's Weigh In, we bring to you guys the talk about Jon Jones retiring. And then we bring to you back on the Jake Paul, because it's fight week for Jake Paul. You know, there's been some rumor circulating Jake Paul might possibly be scheduling a fight against a current world champ. So we're going to see how that feels, how that looks, and we're going to break it down. So let's get right into it on this week's weigh-in. So, first off, I want to say congrats to Jon Jones on a great retirement. But, a lot of times we've been talking about running on this podcast, opponents running from other opponents. And one of the things I think about was Jon Jones' retirement because he did not want to face Asmanal again. He didn't want to face Tom. I think his name was Tom. Tom, you know how I always do. I'll fact check myself and I'll get it for you guys. So let's go ahead and let's fact check me. Let's fact check me on this one. So I think the best we look at is Tom. Yes, Tom Aspinall. Tom. I think, is it possible to say he was running from Tom? That can be said because really that Tom fight, it really looked like that was all the likelihood, Jon Jones and Tom again, but he decides to retire. But on a what a great UFC career Jon Jones had. So that's what a great career to have for if you're Jon Jones. That's just absolutely stunning set career for Jon Jones. So, that's an interesting thing. That and that's really good. And that's something that I think is just absolutely amazing. That Jon Jones, walked the walk to say, hey, it's my time to retire. And it's my time to finally say, hey, I'm done. And all of that. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's definitely something that, is amazing for Jon Jones, to be put in that situation and be able to do something such as that, that's a great thing for Jon Jones. That is just, and I feel like that's a great thing. I feel like, in all likelihood, we thought we were going to get, we all thought we were going to get a very well, we all thought we were going to get that one thing we thought we were getting. We thought we were going to get the Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall again, and we did not. So, Jon Jones upped and retired. So that's something we kind of have to deal with, and that's something that's truly, truly, truly something crazy. Something that we didn't really think would ever happen. I kind of was doubting that Jon Jones was going to go against Tom Aspinall again, but a lot of it's stalling because that's what I've learned now that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the stuff we have right now is stalling, and that's the truth. A lot of these fights are stalling. A lot of the stuff that we're trying to get together is just not really getting. It's not really getting the way it should, and a lot of things aren't going the way it's supposed to. And I think that just tells to the interesting nature. So, that just shows us to what's going on and to what's not. Will we ever get to a point that we were going to see a number 2 of Jon Jones? I don't really think we were. I think it was one of those interesting things that we may or may not have been going to see. That's something that and that's something, really, when you talk about, Jon Jones, you talk about that was a guy that had a great career. It was a great career. You talk about that it was absolutely an amazing career for Jon Jones. Jon Jones was, not everybody was able to, you know, John Jones did something that just was absolutely, when you talked about a guy like John Jones, you talked about a guy that, you know, was absolutely crazy. He didn't get the nickname Bones for nothing. They called him John Bones Jones, and that's because he earned it. You know, he was a guy that got in there and did everything he needed to do. He wasn't a guy that decided to mess around. He wasn't a guy that when it came to doing the things he had to do, it it was rare. I feel like it was rare to ever see a fight where John Jones didn't perform. Very rare to see him not perform in a fight. And I think as a lot of these older guys in the UFC get older, I think we start to see that we will start to see some some of these other guys that have been there a little longer. We start to see some of those guys are not going to stick around as much because we've got we got a young age game going right now. You got a lot of young UFC stars in there, and it's just getting to the point where I'm not saying they can't keep up because we know some of these guys can absolutely demolish certain guys in certain weight classes. I think one of the things we have to say to ourselves is not can they stick around. The question is, did they want to? And when you look at John Jones, I don't think it's looking kind of obvious that he didn't want to fight Tom Aspinall again. And Tom Aspinall, you know, I will always apologize for the butchering of the last name, but we'll just call him Tom for now. Um, I really think that was something interesting to whether he wanted to fight Tom again or to whether he didn't. He beat him. I kind of look at this as similar to a Conor McGregor situation because when you look at Conor McGregor, when you look at Conor's situation and he finally beat Khabib and he finally was able to do the thing. I mean, not beat Khabib. 100% apologies. Beat Diaz, Nate Diaz. When he was finally able to beat Nate Diaz, you know, you look at would that have gone again? Would they have ever fought again? You look at all the things that was able to be done for Conor and the things in Conor's career, and you say, okay, this is kind of similar. I don't think John Jones won. I don't think John Jones was going to fight Tom again. I think he was just trying to delay his what I like to call his he was trying to delay his retirement. I think he was trying to hold on. Is it a piece of him that wanted to take that fight? And I think there was a chance of that, um, of him thinking about that. But I don't think there is much of that even thought that was going to really get through because the negotiations were failing for that. We all know that the negotiations were not clear. That fight would have been scheduled. So let's look at that. And we all knew the negotiations for that were failing. So if that's the case, how close were they and how close were they not to John Jones having that fight against Tom Aspinall and against Tom? How close was it? We may never know. And I think that comes to, like we say, when I know our other half, we talked about saying we were going to talk about Jake today. A little more Jake because it's his fight week. Same thing. How long are we gonna get failed negotiations with Jake and KSI? This is all boxing, like the same thing. We had a failed negotiation with Jake and Canelo. So you look at it holistic, where and what is going wrong, and that's why I said, we talked the subject of running. You know, I would love to know the fans who can weigh in. Do you think John Jones was running from Tom? Do you think John Jones wanted that fight? Because it kind of seemed like Dana White said, "Hey, we're not really getting anywhere, and if we don't get somewhere soon, we're gonna move on." And it kind of just felt like it was being stalled out almost. And I kind of felt like, okay, if you're stalling out this, it doesn't seem like you want to do it. It's kind of like, all right. I kind of relate it to, we've all been young before. When you're asked to do something, a friend, it could be a friend, a girlfriend, a mom, a dad, anybody. They ask you to do something, and you're like you kind of groan about it, like almost like, yeah, I'll get to it, but you never end up doing it, like because you don't want to do it, like you don't want to do something. So, not saying that's what was going on with Tom and John Jones. I'm just we're as I always say, we're speculating here. We're going to speculate here. We're not, you want the truth, you Google it. But here on the way in, we're going to bring you our opinion, and that is only an opinion. That is always my disclaimer, that what I bring is an opinion, how I feel about something, and my opinion into what I can grasp onto a situation. Um, you know, I don't think Tom Aspinall or Tom, I don't think Tom would have been the one trying to delay the fight, because right now all signs look as if Tom Aspinall has been named the champ. So I'm pretty sure they've named Tom the champ. And as you know, I'm going to say my famous line. I'm going to fact check myself. And I only say that because, yeah, so they named Tom Aspinall champ after John Jones retired. And, I just feel like I said, the running of from another athlete. I really feel like, was John Jones running? A lot of you can weigh in on this. You know, Many of you will say he was ducking the fight. And all I'm going to say is my opinion is yes, he was. John Jones did not want that fight. I think Tom was ready to get his revenge here, and I think John Jones did not want the fight. And I think there's a reason for that. I think he has his reasons, whatever his reasons may be. But, I kind of think like a lot of people talk the talk. And I bring up Conor McGregor for only one reason. Listen, whether he lost to Khabib, but he still got in that ring. Conor says he's going to beat. If he believes he can beat, he's going to get in the ring. He lost to Mayweather, but he got in the ring. There are going to be those fearless guys that believe they can do what they want to do, and they can do or can't do. And that's the great part, that they want to do what they can do. And I think in terms of what goes on, you just put yourself in that area of, okay, was Conor going to be able to do it? But he gets in there. So Conor in every fight believed he could win, but he still got in there. So even if you think, Aspinall's or Tom's looking to beat John Jones this time, you don't run from him. You still get in that ring, man. You still get in that ring, man. You go down like a champ, And I know many of you will say Conor is a whole episode in himself to what he did with his career, but you have to say John Jones was another foundation laying guy. He's been there for a while. You talk about Anderson. So you talk about there's some really good greats. Like when we get back to like Chuck Liddell. We get back to Brock Lesnar when he was involved there. There were some older guys like Frank Mir that when we talk about built the foundations of UFC. And I know, you don't always say, okay, certain guys you might not agree would be not in the same conversation, but is part of that foundation. John Jones would put some huge fights up for the UFC. Conor forced wanting to be the champ, which now everybody's able to do. So you talk about like whether some of these guys are built in history and whether some of these guys are not is up for debate. And obviously, this is the weigh in, and we're gonna weigh in. I know, people may say I always use that line, but it's true. That's the uniqueness of our name. It is the weigh-in. So, we're unique enough that we're just not, we can always step up, put something on a scale. And the question is, John Jones left a legacy. And do you think he's a part of the biggest legacy of the UFC? Is he part of the bigger, broader picture? We've been talking legacies on this pod. And is John Jones part of a bigger legacy? I think he's part of those building blocks. I think he built something. I think he definitely. A lot of people look up to John Jones and the way he's able to, I I won't say outside of the ring is up for discussion. The cage, that they call it, up for discussion. But the way he has been as a UFC, conducted himself as a UFC, like into going into his matches and believing in what he can do, he's not like most of those guys that get up there and say, I'm going to give you the best match right here. He's a guy that has been able to really go up there and give everybody a best match. And I really think when you talk about a guy like John Jones, you talk a lot of times you talk about once in a generation talent right there. You don't get UFC guys that are that dominant and that, like of a John Jones. I understand people say you could argue you don't get a Connor. I think you can. You look at what some of these athletes have been able to do. I understand you're not going to get a guy that's got a mouth and says he can do something, but Sugar Shane is almost similar. I get why many will not agree with me, but I mean, like when they kind of have that mouth like Connor did, getting in there and saying, "I'm gonna beat you," or I'm gonna give you the best beat down, you know, and that made the difference. He was a guy that he was gonna tell you, like, I know this is not about, this ain't an episode about Connor, but to go in there and take Jose, and to take, to go in there and beat Jose Aldo, and to go in there and beat the guys he did, you know, to go in there and do the things that Connor did, you say to yourself, those like him and John Jones are guys that I would say John Jones was more of a dominant guy. I would kind of say, although Connor became champ, I would say John Jones, although both of them put themselves in trouble outside of the octagon, but I would say, there were some comical moments that that were able to get done, you know, that were like they were very good. They were very good. Like even Connor, okay, who gets up on a stage? And there was another fighter that had done this at one time. Not the same thing, but something similar. We'll get to it. Goes up there and steals Eddie Alvarez's belt. Like, what fan doesn't want to see somebody take something and say, I'm gonna get this, and then get it? John Jones is, I'm not saying he's of a similar guy, but he's a guy that, John Jones was able to put up some fights, man. John Jones had some. I think it. When we talked in terms of saying a legacy, that's a legacy. That's a huge legacy with John Jones. That's a huge thing. Even just so much. And here's where I'm going to explain what I meant by there was another guy that did the same thing. There was another guy that went to his UFC press conference, and instead of having the belt, he went on eBay and he bought a UFC belt and he sat it on the table and he's like, and then Dana White looks at the belt and says, "Oh, I was checking to see if it was real or not." That's the thing I talk about with UFC guys, the guys that get after and say, I'm going to do what I need to do. And some of the stuff I've really found to like about the UFC is those ones and twos. Like, okay, you're telling me you're going to do a second fight? You're telling me we're going to fight again? You're going to host a second fight? Like, okay, yes. Like, I like to hear things like that. Like, that you're telling me that, oh, one guy gets beat, like Connor and Nate Diaz. Connor gets beat, and then you tell me now Nate Diaz and Connor are going to fight again. So Connor can get his rent. Absolutely. I know early on the podcast we talked about not doing so much as ones and twos. I mean, not ones and twos, but so much as doing second fights, twos. But like, there are a few times where I will allow it. Like, there are very few times where I say that needed a second fight. And I think Tom Aspinall and John Jones is one of them. I definitely think, or I think that was already the second fight. I'm going to fact check myself on that. Actually, I'm going to fact check myself right now. I'm going to fact check myself the best way I can. Hold up. Hold up. A lot of people are saying John Jones did duck Tom Aspinall. So, interesting. I mean, that's the same thing we were just saying, that's what we were just saying, but as I still fact check myself. And So we didn't see it. So we didn't. So to do what you could do. So this is the best. So this is the best thing we got. And I'm getting you an answer. So I kind of feel like in terms of John Jones, they never really got in the ring together. So I really do. You're gonna, I really find it hard to believe to not say John Jones was ducking at this point. I really find it hard to believe to not say John Jones was ducking this fight. And many may not agree with me on that, but I think he was ducking. He was ducking. He was ducking. There's no way to not find him ducking in this fight. I just I can't find a way where I say John Jones wasn't ducking. He was definitely ducking. He was definitely ducking, Tom. I think he was. I'm gonna go out and say it. I think he was, and I think the only time you start ducking a fighter, and we've been over this with Canelo, is when you're gonna get beat. Is when you believe you're gonna be beat. Anytime like that, when you believe you can be beat, that's the only time we know you're gonna be ducking a fighter, specifically ducking a fighter like what I believe John Jones has done. So I kind of feel like John Jones definitely ducked Tom Aspinall. As much as many may not agree, I definitely think he did. I definitely think he did. Amidst whatever reports may say, if you're supposed to sign a multi-deal fight, getting it done, and then all of a sudden you turn around and you're like, I'm not going to do it. I'm retiring. There's not anybody here that can prove to me that John Jones did not duck that fight. There's not anybody that can prove to me John Jones did not duck that fight with the stakes that was involved. Like, no way. He definitely ducked for that. And I kind of feel like that's an interesting way to go about it. Um, but we definitely have to continue, the spot of what's going on, what is and what isn't. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it's definitely a interesting partake from John Jones that you're gonna turn around and duck a fight like that. And especially John Jones, I kind of hold John Jones to a different standard only because and many may not agree with me, and that's only because he's a really good fighter and he's been able to prove a lot of times what he can and can't do. And I think when you're a guy of that nature, there's no need to be ducking a certain fight. Just get in there and prove him wrong. You know what I mean? But I guess he felt differently otherwise the situation there. But that's more than that. I mean, if we dump into to the Jake Paul, so it's only a rumor. So it would not be official. It wouldn't be official, but it's just, it was posted by Happy Punch. Jake Paul revealed he's in negotiations with cruiserweight world champion Badu Jack and Zero Ramirez for his next fight. So, do I think Jake Paul? Do I think Jake Paul can win those fights? I think I want to see, and I'm gonna answer it like this. I think I want to see how he does against Chavez, and how he goes up against Chavez, an experienced boxer with with some legacy. The Chavez family has some big legacy, big legacy. So I want to see how he phase up in this next fight. And if we do get a Jake Paul knockout, I'm going to say, yeah, you're ready to stand in there with those world champions. You're ready to put up a fight. I think he's ready to bring his best Lamont Roach, and that is going in there and nobody believing you can do it, and you come and you shock them. I think that's best to happen. Now, do I think if it goes to decision with Cesar Chavez Jr. Chavez, do I think Jake Paul can win? I think if this fight goes to decision, I think yes, Jake Paul gains experience, but I don't specifically say that some of these world champions like Badu, like Jack and Ramirez. I don't think I understand that's a path to undisputed. You beat one, you beat the other, but you start the path, I should say. But here's my thing. You got to get a commission to sanction that. First of all, you got to get a commission to say, hey, we're not going to strip the belt from you if you win it. You know what I mean? Like, you got to get a commission to, like, say, hey, we're not going to take the belt if you win that fight. You can keep it. And I think almost in a sense, it would be interesting if he gets the commission to say, belt's yours, you win. He can show that he's in it with this Chavez. He can knock out Chavez. I give him credit that he has not been posting all over YouTube with this YouTuber. He's been in his boxing mindset. I do think that if he puts out Chavez like he might, we never know what could happen. He might. If he goes there and he walks down Chavez and tears up Chavez and ends Chavez, it doesn't matter if it's late, early, middle round, he ends him at all. My opinion is going to be on. I think Jake is within his place to say, hey, I want to go up against a world champ. And Chavez is a former world champ, so there's kind of some, still you still former world champ, still you earned that world title, so you still got that world championship background experience. So I kind of think if you can handle a former world champ like Chavez, I want to see that Jack, and if not Jack, please, I want to see Canelo possibly. But I don't want to see no exhibition from Canelo. But then belts on the line. You know what I mean? Like, let's see these belts on the line. Even if the commission gonna strip them, at least let's see it. You know what I mean? Like, let's see how Jake gonna do, because he say he could be this, he could be world champ, he could beat these guys. You know what? Line up the fight and let's see it. At least if we're not gonna get KSI, line up that fight and let's see it. That's what I think. Line up the fight and let's see it. If we're not gonna get like a KSI fight, or if we're not gonna get, some of those fights we've been looking for, and thinking about, I think one of the best words to say here is, if we're not gonna get what we've been kind of like hoping to line up, I'm gonna just say then at that point, give us what we're looking for. And at that point, if we're not going to get KSI, get you lined up with a world championship fight, so that we could see what's going to happen. So that we could see if you're going to get a world title. You could beat the guys, or if you can't. But nonetheless, guys, this is yet another weigh-in episode getting out for you. Lately I've always said, I didn't feel these episodes are as strong as others, but I've been getting various reach outs on social media of people telling me, no, you got to believe in yourself a little more, and that these are strong episodes. I'm gonna listen to them. I'm gonna listen to them very well. I'm gonna listen to them and take their opinion and say, okay, if you think these episodes are strong, you guys like them, I'm gonna keep bringing them. For some of us that might not be, or might be watching both boxing wrestling, don't worry, because Thursday is gonna be interesting, as we have we have a whole situation going down with the Bassett family going down, and we're going to weigh in on that. So, we're going to weigh in on some good wrestling topics that are going down, seriously going down. Interesting stuff. But nonetheless, this is the weigh in. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. This is the weigh in by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return. Folks, don't worry. I'm always in contact. Making sure that we can try to find a comeback date for that. But do not worry. The videos will not stop, as you already know. We started in January, wanting to keep recording, keep getting videos out, and we have yet to stop, and we won't. So, with that being said, this is the weigh-in by Benoit Chestnut and Norm Festner. Be return at some point. Weigh in. Out. The weigh-in, where stories ignite.